We're really grateful that you have come back. We've torn you away from your coffee and we're keeping you from your drinks. So we will try to make sure that we have a really productive conversation here today. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to our panel discussion on the responsible recruitment of women migrant workers. Today we're going to be exploring some of the experiences of women migrant workers, the issues that they face, and some of the recommendations that we hope might be helpful to help you strengthen responsible recruitment practices of women. As we delve into this topic, it's important to note and frame, and I think we started the day out with the statistic, but I think it's also fitting that we end it with this statistic, is that there's an estimated 70 million women migrant workers in the world, and they're employed in all sectors and geographies. And it's recognized that women migrant workers play an indispensable role in the global economy. They are contributing significantly to development and the prosperity of both their countries of origin and their countries of destination and employment. Yet despite many of their vital contributions, these many women face significant challenges when they are working abroad. They face essentially a triple threat of vulnerability and face challenges due to low wages and low status employment, and because they are migrant workers, and due to the vulnerabilities they face because they are women. So at the same time, we're seeing an increase of women undertake labor migration, and this underscores the need to address the unique challenges and vulnerabilities women face, and to ensure that they experience protection throughout their journeys and are empowered in the workforce. So I'm very pleased today to have an excellent panel with me. I have two of our panelists are here in person, and we have one participating online. I'm going to give a brief introduction and then we'll move into the questions. So I'm very pleased to have Marilyn Crosser with me here from Fair Square. She's a senior researcher and has over 20 years of experience in human rights campaigning and advocacy. And she has conducted research on topics including corporate human rights due diligence practices, migrant worker rights in the UK and internationally, and sports and human rights. Online, we also have Anne Abunda, a migrant worker and founder of Sandigan in Kuwait. We can see her up here on the screen. She is from the Philippines and she lives in Kuwait, and she is the head volunteer and founding chairperson of Sandigan Kuwait and Sandigan Kuwait Domestic Workers Association. And then finally, we have Agnieszka Razinska, and if I've pronounced that wrong, please forgive me. She's a regional program manager at the Foundation Avina and is a human rights specialist with over 25 years of experience in strategies for civil society organizations to support and promote human rights advocacy. And she really has driven quite a lot of social impact and facilitated cross-sectoral partnerships, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So as we're moving forward, I am going to start with our first question for Marilyn and kind of our first intervention here. She's going to introduce us to a recent report that is quite interesting and was a pleasure to read, that was developed with the Institute for Human Rights in Business, entitled Respecting the Human Rights of Women Migrant Workers During Recruitment, which was recently released this year. Can you tell us more about some of the findings of this report, Marilyn?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much to the IHRB for inviting me to speak here today. Just to briefly introduce Fair Square, we are a research and advocacy non-profit working to stop human rights abuses, and migrant worker rights is one of our focus topics. We worked with IHRB earlier this year to review the implementation guide to the Dakar Principles, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. That was a piece of work to mark the 10-year anniversary of the principles, and it was reviewed with a view to adding recommendations on specific actions that businesses can take to promote respect for women migrant workers. And to accompany that, we wrote a short report, as Sarah's mentioned, for businesses on what businesses can do to respect the rights of women migrant workers during recruitment. So in that piece of work, we looked at two main areas. challenges for women migrant workers, which I think Anne is going to speak about, so I'll leave that to her primarily, protection in law and international standards for those workers. And we made a series of recommendations for business. So we've heard about the number of women migrant workers that there are globally. Many of those women are working informally, and most are from culturally and racially marginalised communities. Women are migrating for work in increasing numbers, and demand for their labour is growing, particularly in agriculture, garment manufacturing, electronics, hospitality, and care work. Most domestic workers are women. So those are the sectors that they are concentrated in terms of sectors that are lower paid. These workers, these women, are often subjected to a range of exploitative practices throughout the recruitment process. So we've talked about recruitment fees here all day. I think it's come up in every session. For women, that's a particular issue because they tend to have fewer resources than men at the beginning of the migration journey. So when they're indebted, they're then more vulnerable to further exploitation. The issues for women start pre-departure, in country and on return. But what we found in the research was that there is a consistent failure on the part of most governments to ensure that their rights are protected and respected. So origin country governments are reliant heavily on remittances from migrants and are often reluctant to interfere with a system that brings economic benefits. Whereas states that workers are migrating to often take a security-based approach. And so factors like the way that gender can heighten vulnerability to exploitation are overlooked. Often what states have done in reaction to reports of abuse is to attempt to place restrictions on women's ability to migrate for work, which has had the unintended consequence of forcing them into higher risk informal channels. Challenges for women migrant workers we found are featuring rarely in the non-binding standards and the guidance on responsible business practices that companies often rely on to formulate their own policies. And so as a result, very few businesses have paid specific attention to those issues. Responsible recruitment requirements, we know, are an increasing feature of public procurement processes. Allegations of abuse can have significant reputational and potentially legal, very serious legal consequences. Meanwhile, proactive engagement, due diligence, and transparency can have a positive impact on companies' reputation, their legal compliance, and their stakeholder and supplier relationships. So in terms of what it is that companies can do, we recommended the following steps, and some of them will be familiar to you. So the obvious one, carrying out human rights due diligence, including supply chain mapping to understand where women migrant workers are present in supply chains, and assessing policies and procedures through a gender lens to ensure that issues facing women migrant workers are front and centre, and conducting gender-sensitive human rights risk assessments. Obviously, investing in responsible recruitment, including committing to the employer pays principle, simplifying recruitment processes by directly hiring and encouraging suppliers to do the same. And the other side of the responsible recruitment coin, if you like, is providing decent work for women migrant workers. So that means fair pay, equal pay for equal work, secure employment, and safe conditions. So violence and gender-based harassment in the world of work is a massive issue for women migrant workers. And there is now the Violence and Harassment Convention, which was agreed in 2019, which defines gender-based violence in the workplace and creates requirements for states to address it. So we would hope that that would give an impetus for further action. But at the moment, it's not really been high on the agenda. Just to close out, then, another key recommendation for us was the need for more women to be employed and or promoted to supervisory and managerial positions, because we find when there are more women in those senior positions, this can help to address discriminatory practices in workplaces. That's a very brief summary of the report, and as I said, the points in the implementation guide give some more detail at the very practical level on the sorts of things that businesses can do.
Thank you. I really appreciate, the practicality of a resource like this. I think that when you're tackling these wide-scale kind of endemic issues that affect so many people, it's important to kind of have something that can give you directly kind of an insight into what's going on. And to maybe segue into our next question here is we have Anne who's joining us online, and she's bringing really critical voice from on the ground, and has been a migrant worker herself, and is working with an organization and leading an organization that represents a predominantly feminized sector of work, domestic work, and often, people in this industry have low wages and informal employment conditions. So I want to turn the time over to her to share maybe a little bit more of a reflection of the on-the-ground experience of migrant worker women and the conditions that you're seeing from women in this sector and that have migrated for work. What are the enduring issues, and can you speak to kind of what you're seeing in regards to their recruitment, Anne?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, IHRB, for inviting me to speak in this session. I am Anna Bunda from Sandigan, Kuwait, an integrated community center, the first licensed migrant organization in MENA region. Our main work evolves in case handling, organizing, representation, capacity building, collaborate with local and international organizations that can support our work, especially when it comes to regulation and policy change. We work with different nationalities such as Filipino, Nepalese, Ethiopians, and different African communities from Sierra Leone, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Kenya, and Cameroon. We are also working with transnational organizing. So when it comes to the trends, the MENA region is experiencing increased migration, particularly of women, migrant workers from South and Southeast Asia, and in East and West Africa. Ongoing policy reforms, including changes to the kafala system, as claimed by some countries in the GCC especially, which all we know that kafala still exists. New labor laws which aim to provide better protection for migrant workers are questionable when it comes to their implementation. Some countries in GCC and MENA still exclude migrant domestic workers in the labor law, or rights of the sector are unspecified. Advocacy and support networks are also growing, with NGOs and organizing working to raise awareness and improve conditions. However, challenges persist, including the kafala system, lack of legal protection, long working hours, poor living conditions, limited access to healthcare, and social isolation, leading to mental health issues and economic exploitation. Despite these challenges, there have been notable improvements through international collaboration and efforts to empower workers. The recruitment experiences of women are influenced by the policies and regulations in their countries of origin. It is already mentioned by the first speaker. Unfortunately, many labor-sending countries lack sufficient regulation for recruitment agencies, resulting in various challenges such as human trafficking, illegal recruitment, dissemination of misleading information, high recruitment fees, and insufficient protective laws. Lack of training prior to departure and upon arrival, as well as pre-employment training with a focus on safety, fairness, and issues related to migration. It is also important to consider cultural awareness, which we see as one of the factors that affects the situation of migration. There are still other challenges that women migrant workers face when working in certain countries. This includes the lack of diplomatic representation, unhelpful embassies, difficulties due to language barriers, limited knowledge of their legal rights, and the inability to assert their own rights. Additionally, the kafala system in many countries in the Middle East and North Africa ties a worker's residency to their employer, creating an imbalance of power and independency. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. I think that's really important to note some of these systematic issues that you flagged here, and that when there's misunderstandings of kind of gender and cultural roles in countries of origin and destination, as well as regulations that aren't cohesive, it has impacts on workers, and particularly in a sector like the domestic work sector, this can have, detrimental effects on someone's employment experience, particularly when it's not managed, or there's no oversight or corporate policy that can really capture that, because it is such a different sector of work. If I can maybe spring a follow-up question on you, Anne, I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate very briefly on, are there additional things that you're finding that women are facing in their day-to-day? Are you seeing discrimination? Like, are you seeing, women come with more issues than other migrant communities in Kuwait? And can you speak to that very briefly?
Yes, especially for domestic workers, we encountered, since one of the focus of our work is case handling. So we work with a lot of women who are suffering with different kinds of abuse. In Kuwait, we have, not only in Kuwait, but in GCC, we have levels of discriminations. Like if you are an Arab woman, there is a discrimination compared to if you're a Filipino or an African. So when it comes to access to justice as well, most of the African communities, they are not, African women especially, they are not being entertained properly because of discrimination. So there's a lot of things that needs to work on, especially on the ground, when it comes to gender sensitivity training and a lot of things. Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent. And that's an excellent point as well, is that we also can't view women as a monolith or a single population, that they experience, like women have diverse experiences and they're experiencing other, factors into this. And so I think that it's making sure that there's an intersectional approach to also looking at these issues and looking at even the gender dimensions of this. Moving forward, Agnieszka, it's over to you. We've had some introductions to the conditions and what migrant women are experiencing while they're working. And I know that Avina is progressing some really interesting and exciting work on enhancing dialogue and integrating gender into their development initiatives. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about this work and how the Avina Foundation is driving forward impacts for women migrant workers.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I will confess I have a problem because I brought some notes to share with you, and then I took notes on top of my notes, so we'll see how it goes. But I hope not to confuse you too much. But just to start, Fundación Avina is a global organization with 30 years of work in the Global South, especially in Latin America. And our mission is to drive collaborative processes that bring sustainable change and sustainable development. So among other things, we bring together key stakeholders on the local, national, regional, and sometimes international level to develop a unified vision and a common agenda to solve problems. And we work in partnership with many different civil society organizations. This has been the case for the agricultural migrant worker corridor in Mexico and the US, and in other places of Latin America, Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and also we started a project very recently in Chile, where we have brought together a group of expert civil society organizations in an initiative called Periplo. And I'm so happy that some of them are here, Stronger Together, Verite, Cierto, and others are watching online. And we also have developed a collaborative initiative called Arropa that aims to strengthen the labor system in the textile sectors in Mexico and Central America, that specifically focuses on ending violence against women in the workplace. So as you see, collaboration is key for us, and I'm so glad to hear that for others as well. In previous panels, we heard the same key word, collaboration, and I would love to share more with you offline as well about this work. These initiatives have put women, workers' voices in the center of everything that we are promoting and doing with our partners. And we aim to elevate their experiences and their voices as agents of change. And I think that's key to say that we, along with our partners, are ensuring to create a narrative around women voices and women workers as agents of change. And I think it's important to say what Marwan was saying before, the role of women in the agricultural sector has changed a lot. In Mexico, women are about 23% of the workforce within the agricultural sector, and we're talking about between 2.5 and 3 million people that migrate to work in the agricultural industry. So that's one data and information to think about. And then Joe just shared some data about the H-2A visas with me earlier, about 300,000 workers migrate transnationally every year, and this number is increasing, but only 5% are women. So we are working together with our partners to improve the recruitment system, labor conditions, and discrimination. I must say that it's relevant to mention that when we started this collaborative initiatives, we didn't start thinking from the gender perspective or started working with gender lenses. This has been a learning process, and I think it happens to all of us all the time, that along the way we learn very quickly that we need to incorporate gender lenses in our work. And it's also relevant to mention that internal migration in Mexico in the agricultural sector usually is done within a family. It's a family matter. And people migrate with their families, and sometimes it's the whole community that migrates. So to integrate gender lenses in the practical work that we promote and that our partners do in the communities means to understanding the context, and from a gender perspective, but also cultural perspective and historic approach and practical perspective. So there are many lessons learned from the practical aspect of these initiatives and the work that we are promoting with our partners. Some activities that are included in this project are capacity building in the communities of origin, outreach activities to ensure women workers are given equal opportunity and access to information. Also supporting migrant women workers means working, as I said, with their families and their communities, and to accompany the process of educating the whole community is been a great challenge. The development of educational materials and tools from a gender and cultural lenses. Our partners from the civil society organizations working in the agricultural sector identify very quickly a gap in their own experiences and approaches, and have been developing a guideline for the accompaniment of agricultural workers with gender and non-discrimination perspective that I will happily share with you. So, and many other activities, and just to mention one, a last one, is to ensure and facilitate the participation of women migrant workers in decision making and in national and international forums and events and wherever we go, just to ensure that they are included. And this has been a quite complex experience for us, but also for the women themselves. It's easy to say, it's very difficult to actually do it. So many lessons learned from that as well that I would be happy to share with you.
Thank you. I mean, as you were speaking, I think that an important message that I really picked up on is that there's a learning process behind incorporating these issues. I think that sometimes it can be very easy to turn, gender or migrants into a checkbox exercise. And what I'd want to say, and what I'm picking up here, is that it actually requires a little bit more than that. It requires looking at the communities. It requires looking at the family dynamics and how this is impacting on a broader scale. And I think that that's really, really important to be able to take that context and that history and to really create kind of meaningful initiatives. And so I think we'll dive a little bit more into the realities of that as we go forward. But I wanted to turn back to Marilyn here. You've given us a brief overview of this report and some of the insights on it, and we've heard some more background and some other initiatives. But I know a key piece of the work that you have been doing was elaborating and looking at some guidance on the DACA principles, which I believe are in their 12th year, and to strengthen their responsiveness and include, some information on how women's issues and gender issues could be incorporated into that. So can you tell us how these principles and some of this new information can be utilized for businesses, and what some of the key recommendations you would give for businesses that are seeking to advance the rights of women migrant workers?
Sure, yeah. So the principles, as you say, were already out there. They're well known. I think they're well established, and it was on IHRB's initiative that the review was undertaken. So I think that the fact that they'd been there for 10 years in and of itself meant there was some learning, anyway, even if we hadn't been doing the review. A lot of the principles are of general relevance anyway. They are quite general. They're meant to be quite general. The principles are high level. The implementation guide gives a bit more detail, but it's not designed to be a kind of tick list. It's designed as a starting point. So I suppose to pick out one area in particular where we were able to kind of elaborate a number of additional points, it was around company policies and practices. So as I mentioned, the idea of reviewing policies with a view to thinking about their appropriateness to women migrant workers and the particular issues facing women migrant workers, and the same for company practices. So where might companies take additional measures to improve their respect for women migrant worker rights? So for instance, in the handling of grievances, in some instances, women may be more comfortable speaking to other women. Is that there? Is that possible? who did women want to speak to? You know, did businesses understand that? So that was one. On others, I've already mentioned, and this was not in the implementation guide, so we kind of expanded it, I think fairly significantly there. It was around employing more women at supervisory and managerial level, because that can have a very significant impact on the culture of a business. And that was not there in the Dakar principles. It wasn't there in the implementation guide. And I think we really kind of moved that forward. It seems a really obvious one, and perhaps that's why it wasn't really considered. But as we've said, as there are more and more women, migrant workers, and women in general entering the workforce, one, it's important that they get the opportunity to be promoted and to advance, but also when there are women there at higher level, they can start to change the culture throughout the business. Some of it was a lot more granular, some of what we did in the implementation guide. So there were quite significant points relating to health issues for women migrant workers, the importance of health insurance, the importance of maternity protection for women, the importance of making sure that women can access social security coverage, particularly because in lots of countries they're excluded from labour law. Some of it also related to much more practical things like accommodation, making sure that accommodation was appropriate and safe for women. So it really was quite a wide range and at different levels of intervention.
I think that's really important, though, to note that you can have, the top line principles and have an understanding of those, but then apply them in new ways and add additional information and add guidance. It's almost like we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're pointing it in new directions. And I think that that's really important in order to make sure that we're capturing the diversity of migrant experiences, including the experiences of women. And I think that I also just want to pick up on, women as supervisors and having, more women have opportunities to be in leadership roles can also enrich a business's opportunities, even if it is with migrant workers, even if it is with, low wage or low skilled category workers. Having women represented at higher levels can help include their issues more and more. So thank you for sharing more about that. I want to move down the line here. So I know that Foundation Avina is a funder, and they support many of these types of initiatives. And you can play a really strong role in this in driving forward the agenda of responsible recruitment and incorporation of gender into initiatives with a wide range of stakeholders. So I want to kind of pick your mind and have your reflections on how you feel stakeholders can develop stronger alliances and partnerships to promote equality and address gender systematically in their initiatives. And what do you see as being some of the key actions for the private sector to ensure that these alliances are not just talk shops and that there's actually impact coming from them?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, first of all, we believe that funders play a critical role in supporting intersectional approaches to solutions and systemic change, and incorporating new approaches to our work takes time, takes resources, and more flexible funds are needed. So that's something to think about. And if there are any funders in this room or watching this forum, please take this into account when funding initiatives that tackle this agenda. And I think philanthropy in general has evolved greatly in the last few years, and there's also many collaborative initiatives among funders. And corporate donors are coming together also to seeking more to improve impact and improve results. But I think one lesson learned from the initiatives that Fundación Avina is supporting is that building trust is one of the critical elements for success and for building multi-stakeholder spaces. And building trust, it sounds complex and challenging, and it is, but it's possible. So it takes time, it takes a lot of work, but through the initiatives that I described earlier, there's a remarkable collaborative processes that has been set in motion amongst our partners, the civil society organizations, but also it includes a multi-stakeholder dialogue within a community of practice on human rights due diligence in Mexico. And this is a platform that brings together civil society organizations, businesses, and workers. And so it's a space that is fostering this environment where they can freely exchange information, discuss challenges that all the stakeholders face, and share best practices. And we all know that businesses are responsible for respecting human rights, but they also have valuable experience, resources, access to information, and access to workers. And they often are the ones that have the data on how many workers are actually employed within the labor system. In the case of Mexico, for example, we don't have public data on that or public information. So it's very important to take that into account. I also would like to share that our partners from Periplo project in Mexico have come together and developed a portfolio of services to support employers with materials and practical tools that they already had individually, but sharing those and having a common vision and a common space to approach businesses, it's a game changer. So I think we also have a similar experience just 2 weeks ago in Guatemala, where we coordinated with IOM a participative workshop where recruitment agency were part of the discussion. So I think examples like that are available. We could talk more about that, and I'm sure everyone would have something similar to share. But I just wanted to pick up on the last thing you said before, at the end of the previous intervention, that the participation of women workers in identifying solutions to the problem affecting all workers, specifically women workers, is a priority, and it's not an option anymore. And yeah, it's a learning process, but we have already a lot of information, a lot of tools, materials, experiences. And maybe a key message for businesses would be just reach out to us, to whoever you want from this room, and you will find a solution. And I would end saying that when we build multi-stakeholder spaces, it's a great opportunity. We cannot keep talking to ourselves, and that is not the way we've seen it. It doesn't work. We need to open the room for others, and that means sometimes have very uncomfortable conversations and have, open our doors to others and share, and that takes courage. So I invite you all to do that.
That's an excellent message. I think it takes a lot of bravery to be uncomfortable. And I think that with some of these issues is that we always want to believe it can never happen here, or we're never going to be doing this, or of course we have these principles and these values, but it takes a lot of bravery to kind of look at these things and counter them. And it also takes a lot of bravery to share and to exchange experiences about this. And I think that that is really kind of key. The thing that I've picked up from your intervention here is the importance of sharing learnings on these intersectional approaches. And I would even say, taking it a step further, is that there is a potential for the private sector to not only be considered as the one who has a responsibility to look at these issues and to remediate them where they exist, or but they have the potential to be an innovator in this space. Because you're right, they do have the information, they do have the experience and the opportunities, and they also have the resources to undertake new initiatives and to maybe drive forward this action. I'm going to move on to Anne, who's online with us, hopefully still here. And, noting, your work and advocating for migrant worker rights and elevating migrant worker voice, and I wanted to question what are some of recommendations to businesses to better understand and engage with their women migrant workers, and how to engage with their workers more closely. Do you have any recommendations or advice for us?
Yes, Sarah. Actually, I have prepared some recommendation as well as on how the business community can strengthen the inclusion of women's issues into increasing movements, enhance workers' engagement, grievances, and remedy system. Because they know what is happening. Workers knows what is happening in the workplace and how to address it. As I have mentioned, Sandigan Kuwait and ICC is working with migrant workers and survivors. We are also working with transnational organizing. We have PNAI, Care Workers Transnational Union, as well as IDWF. We are also operating not only in Kuwait, but as well as in Bahrain. Recently, we have been working with the Global Migrant Workers Network, which is composed of 80 migrant workers and survivor organizations. Majority are women migrant workers. Collecting the experiences of the women migrant workers as well as survivors can influence changes in policy change. We need to include the women migrant workers in the conversation about them. Collaboration with different stakeholders can do a lot of changes, especially in the issue of recruitment. I have recommendations here like equal opportunity policies, promote gender diversity in hiring, promotions, and leadership positions, implement affirmative action where necessary to address historical imbalances, gender sensitive grievance mechanism, maximizing digital platforms for grievances, designed grievance mechanism that are sensitive to the unique challenges of women. Ensure these mechanisms are accessible, confidential, and trustworthy. Use digital platforms to make it easier for women to report grievances, confidentiality, and track the resolution process. There are some platforms designed in the country of origin, which is not accessible for women, or here in country of destinations, not accessible for women, migrant workers. Here in Kuwait, I can say like most of that platform are in Arabic form. So how can we understand all those things? And it needs a lot of informations like employer's name, employer's civil ID or passport or whatsoever. We don't have access to all those things. So you see, it's disconnected. The platforms, the actions that is being done by stakeholders are sometimes not linked to what is reality. Gender sensitivity training and leadership training for women, awareness campaigns, launch campaigns to raise awareness about women's issues, rights, and the importance of gender equality in the workplace, campaigns about their rights and how to assert it. Regular feedback mechanism, create channels for regular feedback from women migrant workers about their experiences and concerns. Use this feedback to make informed improvements. Enhancing enforcement and accountability system, especially with abusive employers. So why you will deploy a worker to abusive employers or company that doesn't follow the rules or doesn't follow the laws. Fair compensation, ensure equal pay for equal work by regularly reviewing and adjusting salary structures to eliminate gender pay gaps. Or sometimes the salary and benefits depends on nationality, which is very very rampant here in GCC or in MENA region. It always depends on nationality. If you are from this nationality, your salary is high, and if you are from this nationality, you are low. So career development, provide opportunities for career advancement and professional development tailored to the needs of women. Online training modules that can be accessed by women migrant workers for retooling or upscaling. Data analytics. Use data analytics to identify patterns and trends related to gender issues in the workplace, helping it to inform targeted intervention. This is very helpful in identifying the problem encountered by the women migrant workers in the country of destination. By addressing these issues, it can significantly improve the lives of women migrant workers and ensure we are treated with dignity and respect. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. I think that's really important, and I feel like we've just gotten a list of things that each could have their own session. It's incredibly valuable, but I will just pick up on one thing that it's important, and I think you mentioned this, is having feedback that is meaningfully used and making sure that engagement with the workers isn't just happening at a surface level and that it actually is incorporated and means something. So I am going to hand over the rest of our time to the questions, hopefully coming in from online. And if you're here in person with us, please feel free to use the platform to submit any questions.
All right, hi. So I thought I was not going to have any questions when you said one of the main findings is having more women supervisors and then upper management. I thought, okay, that's it, we're done. But we do have 4 questions, and perhaps we'll do it 2 rounds of 2.
Yeah.
So the first question is on context. Why has demand for women migrant workers been increasing? And do we see any changes across different industries? And is there a particular sector you would highlight, for maybe recruiting women migrant workers better, like a positive example? And the second question in this round is, we're talking about recruitment fees. So going back to Merlin's point about a gender lens and it being important, are there studies on women migrant workers reaping benefits of the repayment of recruitment fees? Do we see a correlation in them, attaining higher education afterwards or starting small businesses? Are you aware of such studies? Thank you.
Those were 2 questions.
That was 2
Wow.
questions. 2 whole sessions that could be given.
Go on, Marilyn.
Okay, I'll have a go. I'll have a go. I mean, the obvious one is the care economy.
Yeah.
Because as populations age, there is more demand for care workers. And at the same time, as women in certain economies become more educated, they themselves go into the workplace. So we see that, you can see that in Europe now, and you can see it across Europe now, not just in Western Europe, but you can also see it in places like Malaysia, where say an elderly family member would have typically been cared for within the family. Now professional care workers are brought in, and they tend to be migrants. So that's just one example of a kind of growth sector for women's recruitment and a driver behind it. Is that?
I mean, I think that answers somewhat. I mean, we could talk, I think, all day about various industries and how they're incorporating women migrant workers. I mean, I think down here we were talking about agriculture earlier as it being kind of more emerging, but I know that hospitality hires a significant amount of migrant women workers. I assume that manufacturing, we're also seeing this growing, particularly in apparel. We also see even in higher skilled categories like nursing, or medical care fields where women are increasingly going into and undertaking migration to experience that.
The second one was about repayment of fees. Not related specifically to women, but we do see more and more companies now publishing information about fee repayment. And one of the examples that we found when we were doing the research was from Patagonia, the garment company, which had published really quite detailed information into work that it had done to identify what was going on around fee payment in factories it was using in Taiwan. And I mean, it was very much an eye-opener, because I think the project had gone on for 3 years, and it involved them recruiting, I think, 2 members of staff just to focus on really not a large number of factories and just in this one geography. So I guess the issues around that bring us back to the point about the need for collaboration. It's difficult for companies to tackle these issues by themselves. It requires a lot of resources, and the more that they can collaborate, the better. I don't have an example myself of the benefits of people being repaid fees, but if you imagine the situation for these workers, they have borrowed money to leave, often a very impoverished background. They're then in debt bondage, and they're also sending remittances home to support an extended family. So the pressure on people is massive, and they give up huge amounts of their own lives to do this. So I think any way that that can be ameliorated is fantastic. And if the debt burden can be lifted off people, they shouldn't be in that debt situation anyway, because if the employer pays principle was implemented, they wouldn't have become indebted in the first place. But I imagine it can be transformative for people. So yes, I mean, let's hope when we come to future forums, people will be able to share examples, more examples of that.
And I want to make sure that we're not ignoring. If Anne, do you have any comments on these questions? I know you're online, so it's a bit more difficult to interject, so I want to make sure I give you the floor.
Yes, actually, I agree with her. It's care economy as well, specifically domestic workers here in GCC and MENA region. So most of the reasons why they are traveling, they're migrating to MENA and GCC is because of there's no job in the country of origin, especially in African communities. And the process is very quick for them to send or deploy domestic workers or care workers here in GCC. So I think that's one of the driving factor that drives most of the women migrant workers to GCC and MENA. Thank you.
Great, excellent. And maybe if I can just add one, other thought on recruitment fees and costs, is that, we might not have as many studies or a plethora of information on the impact of repayment specifically for migrant worker women, but we do see the impact for migrant workers. But I'd also add that there's probably an additional lens, and we have done some research and had some consultations with migrant workers from the International Organization for Migration, where we've seen that women, when they have paid fees and costs, they're actually more likely to experience threats against themselves and their families when they have paid fees or costs from those that might have given them loans. Because they are women, they are seen as more vulnerable by the people that have power over them, particularly financial power. We also have to recognize that women are likely coming into these situations, not always, because we know there's a diversity of experiences, but they're coming in with less resources from the beginning. So they are more systematically disempowered, or may be at the mercy of male family members or community members who have control over the finances and resources. We often hear stories of people selling land in order to, migrate abroad and take a job. Well, if you don't even have access to land in the first place, you're already a step behind. So it's important to consider those things when you're looking at potential repayment, because it might not just be the monetary amount. It might be that they've already started out lower or have experienced other issues. And so obviously we would always encourage any remediation that's happening goes and covers repayment, but goes beyond repayment. I believe we have a little bit more time for our remaining questions.
3 minutes.
2 minutes, so quick answers.
Yeah.
Yes, and then we can go for drinks, right?
Yes.
To celebrate
Yes
day
or
one.
no answer.
Yeah.
So the next round of questions, one is on, do you see a connection, a linkage between the responsible recruitment of women migrant workers and their exercise of sexual and reproductive rights? And the next one is a little bit, I think it pegs quite well to what you raised about what can be done. So many female migrant workers are reluctant to discuss openly their problems in recruitment due to the fear of losing their jobs and social stigma. What can be done? And do you see worker organizing having a unique role in this process? So that would be the last question for the day. Thank you.
Another panel.
And I feel like this question on like stigma and organizing is made for you. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, actually, organizing is really, really important. And we saw that. And that's the reason why we have the Ethiopian Domestic Workers and we have the West African Domestic Workers Association. That's the reason why we created that one, because we know that women are very reluctant when it comes to talking about their experiences, especially when it comes to like sexual harassment or other kinds of harassment that they experience in the house of their employers or in the workplace. Having a support system, having an organization that will help you figure out what can be done to address these issues is a plus factor for migrant workers, especially if you are already in the country of destination. Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent. And we have are there any other comments on that question, or do we want to move to the linkage between, women migrant workers and potential impacts on their sexual and reproductive rights?
I would say on the first one, just a very general comment. As more women are entering the workforce, we need to adapt to their needs and not the other way around. So that's, very basic, but very, you should think about that. The change is coming. It's inevitable. So better do it sooner than later, I would say, yeah.
Definitely. And the last question I think is tricky. It's a very difficult one. We have I think no time left, but if we can just comment briefly, is that women we know that reproductive and sexual rights are often impacted for women regardless of where they're working, but probably even more so for migrant workers. We know that many women migrant workers are being asked to, in the application process, they're being asked if they have children or if they're married, and those oftentimes are directly linked to examining if a woman is pregnant or, if she's planning on getting pregnant. And obviously we would advocate that there should be no discrimination for that women should have, full bodily autonomy in those situations and the ability to take on those choices without fear that it's impacting their recruitment. But we do know that it is impacting it in many places, and that there is lots of discrimination, even to the level of asking women to provide blood tests in order just to apply for a job. And so these are things that definitely need to be looked at and countered from the very early stages in order to allow for women to have equality. But noting that we don't have any more time, I just want to touch really briefly on something that you said earlier, is that it's not an option anymore to look at these issues. It's not a checkbox, and that women are in the workforce, they are migrant workers, and they are going to increasingly be migrant workers, and it's important to meaningfully engage them. And I just want to thank my panelists for emphasizing that here today, and give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Sarah.
Of course.
Thank you, Sarah, for leading a great panel to finish us off today on a really important subject. The IHRB report that Marilyn referred to can be found on the IHRB website, or if you go on the portal, it's listed there in the resources. That brings us to the end of today, apart from a little drinks reception that we've got lined up for you. But we'll be starting again tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. Registration, tea, coffee and croissants available from 8:30. We look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. Thank you all very much.